Hi, this is Sarah, and here's my Ignite talk for our last module of our course for the fall semester. Through this course and the textbook, the strategies that stood out to me the most were strategies 3, 4, and 5. I'm also going to talk about the impact that they've had on my classroom and how my teaching practices have changed and strengthened through this course. The first strategy that I'm going to talk about is a third strategy: offer regular and descriptive feedback during learning. In our current system, the majority of the work our students do is graded, and grading tends to be the only formal feedback that students receive during the class. Is that grading good enough for our learners? No. In order to create a lifelong learner, students need to hear constructive and effective feedback. Effective feedback identifies student strengths and weaknesses with specific learning goals or targets that they are trying to achieve. Effective feedback directs attention to the intended learning, occurs during learning, and addresses partial understanding. It addresses what is done correctly, and it makes suggestions for a correction. When you're giving next step feedback, ask a question to a student or give a reminder. Effective feedback does not do the thinking for the student, and it limits the correctives to what the students can do. It gives support and suggestions to improve their learning. Offering feedback. I've used a 3-minute conference during my long-term projects in order to check the progress students have made towards their goals in completing the long project. I've also had students do conference forms and portfolios to show their growth from unit to unit. Strategy 4. Teach students to self-assess and set goals for next steps. In 5th grade, it can be a struggle for students to set goals and evaluate their learning. This chapter was really helpful with providing insight on how students can set their own goals. One way that I've had my students set their own goals is with test and quiz reflection sheets. After a quiz, students will note what they did well and what they can improve on. Then we go back to those reflection sheets before a test or a quiz and see what they want to improve on. I've also started using team and peer assessment sheets for those group projects. So it allows team members to put their input in to the project. Strategy 5. Use evidence of student learning needs to determine the next steps in teaching. This seems like something easy to do in the classroom, but some formative assessment was something that I've struggled with. Checking for understanding and to continue instruction by guided feedback from what students have and have not mastered. To me, that is the definition of formative assessment. Use what students have done to determine further learning needs. So using that feedback loop, which is built into the teaching cycle by effective teachers. Asking myself, where are my students in their learning? And what are my students' learning needs? And how am I going to adjust my lesson and my instruction in order to meet the needs of my students? How has this impacted my teaching practices? Formative assessment is a really big part of the normal classroom routine. I was really struggling with giving exit tickets and tickets in the door because it was a lack of convenience. In Module 3, we went over tech tools. This module was probably the most beneficial module for me throughout the whole entire course because it introduced me to tools that I now use in my classroom that make it easy to formally assess my students. Some of my favorites are Nearpod, and on the previous slide, Google and Microsoft Forms. I also started using the Wizer worksheets, the Wizer online worksheets in my classroom, and my students really seem to like them because they're convenient. Here's an example of a recent Wizer that I created for my class based on a reading from the textbook. My students went on and did a short answer. They also were able to fill in the blank, matching, and vocabulary. Then it self-corrects. Something I also use is Schoology. Schoology is a great tool to use for formative assessments because it grades it for you, so it really is about convenience and time. Here is a snapshot of one of my courses that I have on Schoology. Conclusion. This course has really led me to great resources and strategies that I've started to use in the classroom. Between strategies that have been listed in the textbook and the tech tools that we are introduced through modules 3 and 5, I've really benefited so much from the course. Through the use of technology, I'm really able to add formative assessments to every lesson, and it has become easier to manage. There's a lot less paper to take home and to remember to grade, and it's a great time saver. My student reflections on learning also allows them to make a habit of goal setting, and it creates a growth mindset in my classroom, which I think is really positive. My students are working towards creating specific yet challenging goals for themselves, and I find my classroom to be less task-oriented and more learning-oriented after this course. Thank you.